The fog clung to the Missouri woods like a shroud, muffling the world beyond Carl's cabin. Inside, the air was stale heavy with the scent of whiskey and unwashed flannel. He sat at the table, staring at a cracked mug, its handle chipped from a night he couldn't recall. His fingers traced the fracture, a reflex born of restless guilt. Across the room, Max lay curled in the corner, his German shepherd frame too. Still his breath a shallow whisper against the floorboards. Those eyes, once sharp as a blade, now gazed at nothing, sunken and dull like embers buried in ash. The silence between them was a chasm wide as the desert where everything broke. Outside, a faint howl pierced the fog, not quite animal, not quite wind. Carl's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. Max's ears twitched, a fleeting sign of life, as if the sound carried a warning neither could name. The cabin was a tomb of clutter, unopened letters piled on the counter, their edges curling like dead leaves and empty bottles glinting under the dim bulb. Beyond the warped window panes, the woods loomed, their skeletal branches swallowed by fog that seemed to breathe with intent. Carl's boots scuffed the floor as he stood drawn to the glass by a rustling outside, faint but deliberate, like footsteps on wet earth. Max's head lifted, his hackles rising in a silent ripple, eyes locked on the darkness beyond. The air grew colder, the kind of chill that seeps into bones and memories. Carl's breath fogged the window, obscuring the world, but he felt it, a presence in the mist watching. Max's low growl vibrated through the floor, a warning carved in instinct. Something was out there, circling closer, and the cabin's walls felt thinner than ever. Carl's hand shook as he gripped the chipped mug, its jagged edge biting into his palm. His mind slipped unbidden to that desert night screams swallowed by sand, the crack of gunfire, Max's frantic barks drowned in chaos. The memory was a blade slicing through the numbness he'd built like a fortress. He couldn't look at Max, couldn't face those eyes that once trusted him to lead. In the corner, Max's tail lay still, his scarred flank barely rising with each breath. Carl's chest tightened, guilt coiling like smoke he couldn't exhale. He wanted to speak, to say, "I'm sorry," but the words were ash in his throat. The cabin's silence pressed harder, heavy with their shared failure. Outside, the rustling grew louder, a rhythm like a pulse, and Carl's gaze flicked to the door, dread pooling in his gut. Max's ears snapped upright, his growl a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Carl froze, eyes drawn to the door, where a shadow flickered beneath the gap. A scrap of paper slid through its edges, curling like a secret unfolding. He crossed the room, each step heavy, and picked it up. Scrawled in sharp ink, "Lewis knows you're asking questions." The name hit like a gunshot, dragging back memories of cold orders and colder eyes. Max's gaze locked on Carl, watchful, as if he sensed the storm that name carried. Carl's fingers tightened, crumpling the note. The fog outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Something was coming, someone, and the fragile quiet of their world was about to break. Max's tail flicked once, a promise of loyalty, a warning of truth. Carl's past wasn't always fog and silence. Once he'd been alive, laughing under a desert sun, his voice steady as he called commands to Max, their bond a taut wire of trust. Flashbacks flickered like a dying bulb. Max bounding through training drills, his ears perked tail, a blur of confidence. Carl's hand ruffling his fur after a mission, their shared adrenaline, a pulse of purpose. Then came the night that broke it all, a blast that tore through their team bodies, falling like leaves in a storm. Carl's orders had been too slow, or so he believed, and the guilt was a stone in his chest, crushing the man he'd been. Now in the cabin, he stared at a faded photo of their unit, his thumbs smudging Lewis's face, a cold shadow even then. Max lay across the room, his silence louder than any scream, mirroring Carl's own descent into a life where nothing grew. Carl's days bled into each other, a gray smear of repetition. He woke to the creak of the cabin's floorboards, poured coffee he barely tasted, and set a bowl of kibble for Max, who ate without looking up. The air smelled of damp wood and regret, the walls lined with shelves of untouched books and mission reports he couldn't burn. He'd sit by the window, staring into the fog, his mind a loop of what-ifs. What if he'd seen the trap? What if he'd saved them? Max mirrored him, curled in the corner, his once vigilant eyes half closed, as if guarding himself from hope. Carl's hands stayed busy folding and refolding a worn map from that last mission, its creases soft as his defenses. The cabin was their cage, its silence, a mirror of their frozen hearts, each too wounded to reach for the other. Max's fur, once sleek and proud, bore the marks of that desert night, jagged scars tracing his flank like cracks in parched earth. He'd been a machine of instinct, trained to sniff out danger, to charge through chaos with Carl at his side. Flashbacks burned bright Max, weaving through gunfire, his bark sharp as a blade, leading the team toward a target that became their trap. When the explosion tore through, he dragged a wounded soldier to safety, only to be left behind in the retreat, his leash cut by panic. Now in the cabin, he flinched at the clatter of a spoon, his ears pinning back as if every sound was a threat. His eyes, still sharp with intelligence, held a guarded wait, watching Carl with a mix of loyalty and betrayal. Max's silence wasn't surrender. It was survival, a mirror to Carl's own buried pain. Each scar a story neither could voice. Carl and Max existed like ghosts in the same space, their movements a quiet dance of avoidance. Carl's gaze slid past Max, afraid to meet those eyes that knew too much. Max, in turn, kept to his corner, his body curled tight as if guarding the last of his trust. Yet in the stillness, their pain echoed a shared rhythm of loss. One night, Carl dropped a spoon, its clatter sharp against the floor. Max's head lifted not in fear but curiosity, and he nudged it closer with his nose, a hesitant offering. Carl's breath caught his fingers, brushing the spoon as if it were a lifeline. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition, two souls hollowed by the same fire reaching across the chasm. The cabin's shadows softened, hinting at a bond that might yet mend. The storm roared outside Carl's cabin, rain lashing the windows like 1,000 accusations. Lightning cracked, illuminating the fog-choked woods in stark white, and Carl's pulse hammered as he spotted another note wedged beneath the door, its edges sodden. Scrawled in hurried ink were coordinates numbers that clawed at his memory, tied to that desert disaster. Max rose his growl, a low tremor, ears pinned forward. Eyes locked on the door as if he could smell the intent behind the paper. The air thickened with urgency, the storm's howl blending with Carl's racing thoughts. Lewis, the mission, the truth. Max's hackles bristled, his stance taut, urging Carl to move to face what he'd buried. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in, as if the storm itself demanded they step into its heart. Carl clutched the note, its ink smudging under his thumb, his mind a battlefield of fear and duty. Let it go, he thought, the coordinates burning like a brand reopening that wound could destroy him. The storm's roar echoed his dread, whispering of graves and failures. He paced, boots scuffing the floor, avoiding Max's gaze. But Max stood firm, his eyes steady, unyielding, a silent plea cutting through Carl's fog of doubt. A memory flashed Max's bark, guiding him through smoke, trusting him when the world burned. Carl's chest ached, torn between hiding and chasing the truth. Max stepped closer, his nose brushing Carl's hand, a nudge that felt like a vow. Logic screamed to stay safe, but Max's quiet faith tipped the scale, pulling Carl toward a choice he couldn't unmake. The storm's howl swallowed Carl's hesitation as he grabbed his worn jacket, its leather cracked like his resolve. The coordinates pulsed in his mind, a map to answers or ruin. He glanced at Max, whose ears flicked toward the door, body coiled with purpose despite the scars. "Let's go." Boy, Carl whispered, voice roughed the words, a tether pulling them both forward. Max's tail flicked once, a faint acknowledgement, and he padded to Carl's side, his steps cautious but steady. The door groaned open, rain stinging Carl's face like shrapnel, the fog beyond a wall of secrets. Max pressed close, his warmth a quiet anchor against the gale. Each step into the storm was a vow, messy and raw, to face the truth together, no matter what it cost. The coordinates led to a clearing where the storm churned the earth into mud. Carl's flashlight caught a glint, a metal box, half buried, its lock rusted but intact. Inside a mission log, its pages stained with cryptic notes hinting at sabotage. Max's growl cut through the rain, his eyes scanning the trees, sensing danger Carl couldn't see. Kneeling, Carl's hands trembled as he pried the box open, Max's body shielding him from the wind. The dog's alertness was a pulse, a reminder of their old rhythm. Carl tucked the log under his jacket, his heart pounding with the weight of discovery. Max nudged his arm, a tentative gesture, and Carl met his gaze, seeing not just a soldier, but a partner. In that sodden clearing, their bond flickered alive, fragile but real, a promise forged in the storm. Back in the cabin, the storm's echo lingered, rain dripping from Carl's jacket onto the warped floorboards. Max retreated to his corner, his German shepherd frame, hunched eyes glinting like distant stars in a clouded sky. His low growl rumbled not at Carl, but at the world beyond the walls, a reflex of mistrust carved deep. Carl set the mission log on the table, its weight heavier than the paper it held, but he didn't approach Max. He filled the dog's bowl with kibble, placing it at a careful distance, respecting the chasm between them. Max's gaze flicked to the food, then away, his body rigid as if guarding a wound. The cabin's silence was a cold fog, wrapping them in mutual wariness, their shared past, a shadow neither dared cross. Carl sat staring at the log, feeling Max's eyes on him, watchful, waiting, but still too far to reach. Morning light filtered through the cabin's grimy windows, casting Max's scars in sharp relief, each mark a map of their shared ruin. Carl noticed a limp in Max's gait, a fresh cut on his paw from the storm-soaked clearing. Kneeling, he reached for a cloth, his movements slow, deliberate, as if handling a live grenade. Max stiffened, eyes narrowing, but didn't pull away. The air smelled of antiseptic and damp fur as Carl cleaned the wound, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. Max's breath hitched, a faint whine escaping not from pain but memory, both of them caught in the echo of a desert blast. Carl's fingers paused, meeting Max's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of their mirrored scars. From his corner, Max watched Carl, longer than before, his stillness a fragile bridge, their pain a language only they could speak. Carl's fingers brushed against the mission log, dislodging a broken watch from its pages, its cracked face frozen at the moment the desert exploded. The sight yanked him back, sand stinging his eyes. Max's barks swallowed by the blast, Lewis's voice barking orders that led to ruin. His breath caught the cabin's walls, blurring as guilt clawed his chest. Max's head lifted, ears twitching, as if he too felt the memory's weight. The dog rose, limping slightly, and nudged the watch with his nose, its clatter against the floor a sharp echo of that night. Carl froze, meeting Max's gaze, those eyes holding not blame but recognition. The gesture was small, a thread across their divide, pulling Carl from the spiral. Max didn't retreat this time, his pause a quiet offering, a sign that trust, though fractured, wasn't lost. The cabin's chill softened as afternoon sun pierced the fog, casting golden slants across the floor. Carl, restless, picked up a tattered tennis ball, its felt worn thin from old training days. He tossed it lightly, half expecting Max to ignore it. But Max's ears perked, his body shifting, hesitant yet drawn. He padded forward, snatching the ball with a cautious nip, then dropped it at Carl's feet, tail, flicking once a ghost of his old fire. Carl's laugh, rusty and raw, broke the silence, startling them both. He tossed it again, and Max chased his limp, forgotten in the moment's joy. The cabin felt alive, its shadows retreating as their shared play wove a fragile warmth. Max's eyes met Carl's, brighter now, a spark of trust kindling where only embers had been. Night pressed against the cabin, the fog outside a heavy curtain, but inside a fragile warmth lingered from the day's play. Carl sat on the floor, the mission log unopened beside him, his eyes tracing the ceiling's cracks as memories clawed explosions. Lewis's cold stare, Max's desperate barks. Sleep wouldn't come, his chest tight with guilt's old weight. Then a soft shuffle, Max rose from his corner, his scarred frame moving with purpose. He crossed the room, slow, deliberate, and settled beside Carl, his warmth a quiet shock against Carl's side. Max's head rested on his knee, eyes, half closed, a sigh escaping his muzzle. Carl's hand hovered, then touched Max's fur, steady for the first time in months. Tears pricked Carl's eyes, unbidden, as Max's trust, unspoken, unwavering, cracked open something long sealed. The cabin's silence shifted, no longer a chasm, but a bridge, their bond a pulse against the dark. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the fog thicker than ever swallowing the woods around the cabin. Max's ears twitched, his body tensing as he stared at the window, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Carl, stirring coffee he wouldn't drink, followed Max's gaze. Nothing but mist, yet the air felt charged like the moment before a detonation. A crunch of gravel outside snapped Carl's head up, his pulse racing. Max's hackles rose, his eyes sharp, scanning the unseen. Another note slid under the door, its edges crisp, the words stark. "Stop digging or you're next." Carl's blood ran cold, Lewis's name a ghost in the ink. Max's growl deepened his stance, protective, sensing a threat older than the fog. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a trap closing in. Carl's nightmares surged, a torrent of sand and screams, Lewis's voice cutting through. "Move or they're dead." The cabin's dim light flickered as he jolted awake, sweat soaking his shirt, the note's threat burning in his mind. Max paced his growls, sharp eyes darting to the door as if he could see the past clawing back. Flashbacks hit Carl Lewis's cold orders, the mission's collapse. Max dragging him through smoke while blood stained the sand. "Why didn't you warn me?" Carl muttered, voice breaking not to Max, but to the ghosts. Max's ears pinned back, his body low, a protective snarl answering an unseen threat. The dog's scars seemed to pulse, mirroring Carl's unraveling. He shouted, fist slamming the table, the mission log scattering. Max didn't flinch, his gaze steady, a sentinel against Carl's chaos, their shared pain a raw, unspoken bond. The cabin door creaked open, and Sergeant Lewis stepped through, his silhouette sharp against the fog, eyes cold as the desert night that broke them. "You're digging where you shouldn't," he said, voice low, a blade wrapped in silk. Carl froze, the mission log clutched like a shield, his heart pounding with recognition. Lewis, the architect of their ruin. Max's snarl erupted, teeth bared his body, a taut spring between Carl and the intruder. Lewis's gaze flicked to Max, a smirk curling his lip, but his hand twitched toward a concealed weapon. "You ruined us." Carl spat, memories flooding Lewis's orders, leading to the trap, the sabotage now clear. Max lunged forward, stopping short, his aggression a warning, forcing Lewis to step back. The standoff crackled their past, a live wire, the truth of betrayal laid bare in Max's defiant eyes. Lewis's shadow lingered in the cabin long after he'd gone, his parting words. "Keep quiet, or Max pays a venom that seeped into the silence." Carl sank to the floor, the mission log crumpled in his fist, his breath ragged. Max pressed close, his scarred flank warm against Carl's side, a low whine breaking the stillness. The dog's eyes, steady and unyielding, held no blame, only a quiet vow. Carl's hand found Max's fur fingers, tracing the scars that mirrored his own invisible wounds. The cabin's air softened, the threat's echo fading as their breathing synced a rhythm of survival. Outside, the fog seemed to lift just enough to let starlight pierce through. In that moment, their bond hardened, a silent promise to face whatever came next together, unbroken by the past's shadow. The mission log's final clue pointed to an abandoned warehouse, its coordinates a cold challenge Carl couldn't ignore. He and Max trekked through the Missouri woods fog, curling like smoke around gnarled trees. Max's ears flicked at every snap of a twig, his body low, senses razor-sharp, as if the air itself whispered danger. Carl's flashlight cut through the mist, catching the warehouse's rusted skeleton, its windows black as empty eyes. A faint metallic clank echoed inside, too deliberate to be chance. Max's growl vibrated through Carl's boots, the dog's hackles rising as he froze, staring at the shadows. Footsteps crunched closer, deliberate circling. Carl's pulse surged, the mission's betrayal alive in his bones. Lewis's trap was closing. Max's eyes met his, a silent signal they'd face it together no matter the cost. The warehouse door groaned as Carl pushed it open, the air inside thick with rust and decay. Shadows danced across broken crates, and Max's growl deepened, his body low and coiled. A sudden crash, metal on concrete, sent Carl's heart into his throat. Two figures emerged from the dark faces, obscured hands gripping knives that glinted like Lewis's betrayal. "You should have stopped," one hissed, voice cold as the desert night that broke them. Max lunged, teeth snapping, pinning one man against a crate with a snarl that echoed their shared pain. Carl dodged a blade, his training kicking in, but a third figure struck, knocking him to the ground. Max whirled his bark, a thunderclap, tackling the attacker. Blood and chaos swirled the fight, a mirror of their past. But Max's ferocity, trained, loyal, unbroken, held the line, protecting Carl against the odds. Carl scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, the warehouse a blur of motion and menace. Max stood over a fallen attacker, his snarl unwavering, but a new shadow loomed, Lewis himself, gun-drawn eyes glinting with malice. "You're both done," he spat, aiming at Max. Carl's world narrowed to that moment, his guilt and fear burning away. He threw himself between Max and the barrel, his voice raw. Not him. The gun wavered. Lewis's smirk faltering as Max charged, knocking the weapon free. Carl tackled Lewis' fists, fueled by years of buried rage, pinning him down. Max's teeth grazed Lewis's arm, a warning, not a kill. Their eyes met Carl's and Max's, a vow forged in blood and loyalty, their bond now a shield unbreakable, choosing each other over the past's weight. The cabin's quiet was a balm after the warehouse's chaos, its walls no longer a cage but a sanctuary. Carl sat on the floor, a bandage over his eye, his hands steady as he cleaned a shallow cut on Max's flank. The German shepherd's breathing was slow, deliberate, his eyes half closed but alert, watching Carl with a trust that felt like sunlight through fog. The mission log lay forgotten on the table, its truths exposed. Lewis's sabotage confessed his men detained. The air smelled of antiseptic and pine, the storm's last rain a faint drip outside. Carl's fingers lingered on Max's fur, each stroke a silent apology for the years of distance. Max leaned into him, a soft sigh escaping their survival, a shared pulse. The world beyond could wait. For now they were enough. Days blended into a gentle rhythm, the cabin alive with small acts, Carl filling Max's bowl, Max trailing him on morning walks through the thawing woods. The fog had lifted, leaving the air crisp, scented with earth and promise. Max's limp faded his tail, flicking higher, his eyes meeting Carl's with a steadiness that mirrored the calm settling in Carl's chest. They sat by the fire some nights, Max's head resting near Carl's knee, the crackle of logs a soft counterpoint to their breathing. Carl spoke sometimes low murmurs about the desert, the guilt, the truth, and Max listened, his presence a quiet absolution. Each shared glance, each nudge of Max's nose wove their bond tighter, a tapestry of trust mending their scars. The past lingered a faint shadow, but their steps together felt like healing. The morning sun broke through the Missouri woods, painting the cabin's floor in gold, the fog a distant memory. Carl knelt by the door, lacing his boots when Max patted over his eyes, bright scars softened in the light. Max Carl called softly the name a bridge rebuilt. Max's tail wagged a slow, deliberate arc, and he rested his head on Carl's knee, his warmth a quiet vow. The gesture was small but seismic, a release of fear that had chained them both. Carl's hand settled on Max's neck, fingers steady, the weight of guilt lifting like mist burned away. Outside, they stepped into the dawn, side by side, their shadows merging on the earth, a rebirth not perfect but true, their bond a beacon against the lingering echoes of the past.